Hi everyone, and welcome this afternoon to what is a very exciting webinar with 4 superstars. And my son's just come over to say hi. And 4 superstars. Now you have to head off. and thanks everyone for tuning in. We've already got an incredible number of attendees, so this will go through the roof. I normally, when I introduce my panelists or my webinar people, I simplify then exaggerate. But in this case, I really need to read people's bios very quickly because they are 4 superstars. I really can't believe we have all 4 of you on. Shelley, matriculated Pinelands High School, so Cape Town lady, and BA Rhodes University, teaching diploma UCT, first position, English and history teacher at Fairmont High. Somerset West, founding teacher, deputy head, Somerset College, and took up the position of head of DSG in Grahamstown, which is one of the great schools in South Africa, which she held for 12 years. She's now back in Cape Town and is principal of St. Cyprian's, which all of our Cape Townians will know very well, and all the South Africans will. Kirsty Chadwick, I think all of you know Kirsty. She's our Kiwi, like my wife, a Kiwi, in Cape Town, running an amazing business called TTRO, the Training Room Online. And she has really been instrumental in South Africa, in Africa, and other parts of the world about identifying the key elements in education and making things happen. And I know a lot of people think that I'm hyperactive and work 24/7. She works harder than me. And I don't say that about anyone else. Don't tell my wife. Rapeleng Rabana, featured on the cover of Forbes Africa magazine, me too, but she did it before the age of 30. Mine was 2 years ago, age 57. Named entrepreneur for the world by the World Entrepreneurship Forum and selected as a young global leader. Okay, you've outgunned me already. Young global leader by the World Economic Forum. She's internationally lauded technology entrepreneur. And from her first startup straight out of university, Jago, to chief digital officer at South Africa's largest IT company. So Rapeleng, you really outgunned me. I'm embarrassed. I'm blushing now. She's currently the founder of Rekindle Learning, a learning tech startup, combining learning principles and technology to improve outcomes. So very relevant today. Miriam Chaktai from Pakistan. So it's 7:45 or 8 o'clock at night. She's the Associate Dean and Assistant Professor at the LUMS School of Education, Director of Pakistan Programs for the Harvard University Mittal South Asia Institute, has a doctorate and 2 master's degrees from Harvard University. Now, embarrassingly, I went to Harvard as well, Harvard Business School, but I think she's outgunned me by 10 on the Harvard thing. Specializing in education policy and leadership practice. As a teaching fellow, Dr. Chaktai taught negotiations at Harvard Law School, along with several courses at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Wow. I don't know what to say now, other than, Kirsty, you better come on screen. Can you 4 superstars solve the world of education? I hope so.
1 second, I think that's right. Hi, can you all hear me? Rob, thanks very much for the introductions. It's a pleasure to be thrown in the deep end at the last minute by you to moderate this amazing panel, but I'm going to do my very best. Thanks to everybody for joining. And I think I'm going to start with a question to each of the panelists individually to answer. And the question I'm going to pose is, has the pandemic given us the opportunity to properly rethink and potentially disrupt the entire space of education? And I think to kick us off with answering that, I'm going to go to you, Rapeleng. And we've agreed before this meeting, it's not necessarily a right or a wrong in the answers, and we want to promote debate, and we really look forward to having some of you contribute with your chats as well as we go through this. So Rapeleng, over to you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I do think that COVID has accelerated the conversation around all digital services, including digital learning. And At this point, though, I would say that it's more than anything shown the divide between the have and the have-nots to a large extent. I think in many countries, especially in South Africa, there was a strong push, obviously, for everyone to go online and do their schoolwork from home online. But we haven't seen the opportunities for poorer schools to be given infrastructure, devices, subsidized data to actually do that. And while the sort of top end schools have done really well, the teachers had capacity to put stuff online, they had the infrastructure and the devices to get stuff. And many schools that I've seen students going to have managed quite well out of that. The vast majority that I've spoken to in sort of the public schools have really, really suffered during this time because you can't trade sort of data for your food and your bread. And I'm hoping that out of this period, government and sort of even large private sector sort of vehicles will understand the value and the utility of the internet. And that post this period, it is no longer going to be should we or should we not finance bandwidth capacity or internet capacity in townships and rural areas, and that it's seen as a basic requirement, because when something like this happens, we desperately need it, and we were unprepared in our capacity for bandwidth at this point.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the equality of access to education and who's responsible for that as we go through the chat. Shelley, it'd be lovely to hear your sort of perspective on that and how you found it, particularly within your context.
Thanks, Kirsty. Well, of course, I come from the other spectrum in that I have been very fortunate to be in two exceptionally privileged schools in the last 15 or even longer years. And I think that, so we were able to adapt to the online learning very quickly. So how has COVID-19 changed that space for us? I think that in a sense, it's pushed the dinosaurs, because we do have them in our profession, who have been reluctant to move onto digital platforms. And it's pushed them into that space of a space that's been a threat to them, and they've become excited by it. And so we're seeing teachers now embracing the possibilities that the digital space allows for. I think as well, while it's still a major problem, particularly in the South African context, for disadvantaged learners and their access to digital platforms, what it has made us realize is that there are possibilities of sharing expertise. So even if that expertise isn't brought into the home of a person who doesn't have access to digital stuff, it's to the school closest to us, where we can share our accounting teacher, our mathematics teacher, because now we've seen the possibilities that exist. My hope is, though, that although we need to rethink the space and that education will be turned on its head, my hope is that we won't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think there's a whole lot that cannot be replicated in a blended style learning that we're capable of doing in its physical form in classrooms. What we will forever be able to do now is help children who are unable to come to school for long periods of times, be it because of 2 broken legs or a car accident or a parent or whatever. We've already started putting webcams into every classroom. And I think our classes will all be live streamed forever. And it's wonderful that we have that capability.
Well, thank you very much. I think some interesting things that we'll pick up there on the sharing idea around that, and how going forward that could really impact others. And Mariam, over to you. So in Pakistan, it would be really lovely to just get your view on how similar or different you've experienced this and your sort of take on that going forward.
Thank you very much. So I think that the pandemic has disrupted education in some very interesting ways, because it's going to now expose some of the best kept secrets through which education was used for social reproduction. So the rich people, their kids, even if they were not smart, would end up going to good schools and eventually being rich. And poor kids who were very smart would still end up going to impoverished schools, and no matter how hard they tried, would end up being poor as adults. So some of these secrets that are going to now be thrown out include the redundancy of, for instance, a 4-year college or a master's degree to get a job, which requires the social and economic privilege to be able to take 2 years off, to be able to pay the tuition and the living expenses, to not have to worry about childcare expenses, which marginalizes women. And so just the university model is going to get disrupted, because people will now, as you know, even the Harvard Graduate School of Education is offering a one-time online master's degree this year, which suddenly has become a viable option for a lot of people who could not have traveled abroad, lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, taken on student debt. So this pandemic in some ways is going to be an equalizer in that sense. Similarly, at the college level, this news just came out that some of the Ivy League institutions have decided not to factor in ACT and SAT test scores in this upcoming class. Now, the SAT is in itself a way of reinforcing privilege, because your GRE score is pretty much determined in 4th grade. It's determined by how many books were in your household, whether your parents had college degrees or not, what kinds of words you heard growing up. So all of these things were sort of built into the system to let rich kids go to better schools and become rich, and poor kids to not understand why they got left behind. So I think this pandemic is going to bring about some much needed disruption in education. So we are more focused on learning rather than social signals, economic signals of, this is my university degree that I bought with so much money and time, versus, this is my skill set. And that's why I know, this is what I know, rather than this is what I have on my resume.
Yeah, I love that point. I'm actually going to pick up on that as the next question. So it's really, for me, I'm going to ask it in 2 ways. So one around the design of curriculum, and it's academic versus industry. So from an academic point of view, the curriculum of which we teach our children, or to your point, Mariam, which is delivered in university, how closely aligned is that curriculum to what the reality is in industry and in the world of work? And how well are we actually preparing our young people, no matter what way in which we prepare them, whether it's online, whether it's blended, whether it's in the classroom, how closely are we aligned to that, and whose responsibility should it be to set curriculum, given the pace of change that we're experiencing in the world around us? And Rapaling, to your point, how do we be more prepared for things like this as they come along? So I think, who wants to start? I think we'll just
happy to.
The hands up. Okay, Rapaling, go for it.
Sure. I really love Miriam's points there, and I think she raised some critical questions, because when I think about the challenges we need to address in the education space, one, it's that the what we are teaching is often the problem. It's either not relevant, or the subject is not topical to what employers want. But even if we changed the subjects and had more robotics or coding and stuff like that in, we hit another problem that is not so much about the what we're giving people anymore. The sheer sort of concept of giving people content and giving a potential nurse great nursing content and nursing textbooks makes them a great nurse is not true, and we know this. We need to understand how to build for behaviors, for mindsets, for values. So, and those are built through experiential learning, through the how of teaching, more than the what. And that sort of comes back to Miriam's point, where she's talking about the competencies that are required and the signals being quite weak in terms of really assessing what people have. And I think the root cause of this challenge is really because we haven't come back to the table to ask what are the competencies and the behaviors and the mindsets we actually want. Everyone has the nice words of collaborative mindset or critical thinking or creativity or adaptability. But what do those things mean in a way that someone in Pakistan or the US or South Africa can jointly understand, so that we can define for it, develop for it, and actually measure it? And for me, that's the gap that hasn't happened even with COVID. And we're still quite a long way off, because we actually need a new competency architecture. versus the pass the subject concept, because it's not relevant, because that content is outdated by the time you matriculate or finish your university degree. We needed to be enabling people to adapt, and those are more around behaviors and mindsets and values. And that's really my big worry, that we're not getting to that conversation.
Shelley.
Sorry, you have to just do the mic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I'm a little bit of a purist, and perhaps it's something I've got to go away and think about. But I am concerned at the thought of schools being teaching children for a job market, because I don't think schools should be vocational. And so I like what has been said about the necessity of skills such as adaptability and such like. And then I have to question how easily that can be done online. Because I think that those characteristics, yes, we haven't yet found ways to grow and develop and measure resilience or adaptability or such like, and we need people to look into that, because that is critical going forward. But those are the skills that I think are best taught in relationships and in social situations rather than online. The content is a vehicle to something much bigger at school level prior to the tertiary stage.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try and wrap in here Marae's question. CP, I'm going to come to your question on the teaching side, but Marae's asking us, is it still relevant in today's global world to have Afrikaans as a compulsory subject? And I think we could stretch that based on your response, Shelley, to all subjects even. And curriculums need to be revisited in respect of the available subject choices. Mariam, do you want to just sort of answer that from your perspective and context as well for us?
Sure. So I think one analogy that we can all relate to is, I don't think anyone of us would go and buy a phone that's 10 years old. We would not even consider a model that was 10 years old. Yet our school system is more than 100 years old. We put our students through the industrial model, where everybody sits in one classroom, studies the same subject at the same time, making no space for individual capability, individual learning style, and individual pace of learning. So it's, if you've in the US and also abroad, you have this food store, this restaurant called Subway, where all the sandwiches, now they're all getting tomatoes, now they're all getting cucumbers, and this question of whether this particular compulsory subject should be taught, somebody made this decision that everybody needs to be taught this subject. And I can guarantee you that if today you made a subject called creativity, there would be textbooks for creativity, and kids would rote memorize the text of creativity and ace the exam on creativity and not know anything about creativity or be able to become entrepreneurs. So I think this model, that we have not really come out of the industrial age as far as education is concerned. And this shift that has been brought up by the question, this shift from the textbook to the student learning outcome is very important, because so there's the curriculum, that's the overall curriculum, which talks about that every kid must know fractions by this age, okay? But how you teach them fractions is taught by a particular textbook. Right now, testing is done on the textbook, which leads to a lot of rote memorization. Instead, testing needs to be done on the curriculum, which is talking about the learning. One of the reasons why the United States doesn't do so well on the PISA test, and some other countries do very well, is because they are testing for comprehension. And so these subjects that are pushed onto children, like, here you go, you all have to have tomatoes and cucumbers and this particular kind of protein, they're just pushed on the children, whether there's ideological synchronity over there or not, whether it's outdated or not. And I think that what this disruption is going to allow us to do, much like in healthcare as we go forward, we won't have generic drugs. Medicines will be designed for you as an individual based on your genetic makeup, based on other health conditions that you have. Education is going to do that faster. more individual learning plans, lesson plans will become possible. And I think these questions of, well, if I can have my own individual plan, maybe I would like to consider this subject elective, not required. Those will become possible.
So you're really talking to creating a lot more choice, more personalization, more accessibility. So I think it's really interesting to think through that. There's a lot of questions around the how we do it, but I think before we go there, I want to move to, and the CP is asking the question about the teachers. I want to make it slightly broader and say, you know, who is responsible to deliver learning? And I think at the moment, you know, Rob's little son just ran along. I've got a son being homeschooled online at the moment. You know, I think we've all become a lot closer as parents to the education sector as well. And it started to, I think, for many parents that I'm talking to, broaden the question around, well, who actually is responsible for delivering learning, and how do we all get more involved? So I think, and the question CP had was, and then how do we get the teachers ready to deliver online? Shelley, you've referred to it a little bit, and some of you pushed the dinosaurs. It's sort of really pushed teachers to have to give it a try, just to try delivering learning in a different way. So yeah, this responsibility of who's delivering learning, the role that everybody should play in education. Keen to hear some thoughts on that. Anybody want to start? Okay, that means I've got to choose. Shelley, I'm going to come to you. So how did you get the teachers engaged? Were there specific things that you did, or was it just kind of jumping in? Something had to respond quickly. How did you approach it?
Yeah, I think, you know, while one would never want another pandemic such as this, one way to get teachers and push them along is perhaps to produce the occasional pandemic, because, you know, that has really pushed them into a space that they were nervous to go into, and they are embracing it. There was an online, I forget where, but a wonderful online learning, teaching online platform. It was a United States one, because I remember it was in dollars and I was doing the ching-chings, and I offered it to my staff. I think that before this pandemic, I would have probably got 4 or 5 staff who are always keen to progress and to learn. I had to close it at 30 because of a cost. And I realize, again, talking from privilege, so that the teachers have become excited about this space and are willing to learn. Just before we shut down, our IT manager did Microsoft Teams. We held a meeting where she stayed in her office and the staff were in the staff room. And she said, this is how you're probably going to be teaching in the next while. And, you know, and so it was just gradually nudging them along. But of course, we have the infrastructure in place. I think one of the things, before I hand over, just to say, though, is, you know, I've just gone through reports at the end of this term, and a lot of people have done better at home than they would have done at school. But the reverse is also true. There have been some that have really not coped. And then, of course, we have children here that are on scholarships, and we bought data for them every month to make sure that they had what they needed. But it presupposed that they had a device they weren't sharing, that they had their own learning space that was separate from the main group of people that in the place in which they lived. So their challenges to, you know, I just couldn't wait to bring them back to boarding. Yeah. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I've gone on a bit, but I think teachers are there much more than they were before. Yeah,
and it shows that they can adapt. They can adapt to different ways of teaching and learning. I think that is the exciting part about where could we then take that going forward. What is the possibility in that? Rupeling, do you have a response in this teacher piece, just from just coming at a different perspective of it, and how do we maybe at scale prepare the teachers of South Africa, of the continent, of the world to really embrace this on a bigger scale?
Sure, it's a tough question, that, and I think it's easy to solve for, you know, well-resourced schools and the like. It's really much bigger challenge for lesser resourced schools, and I'm not quite sure that we can get all the teachers sort of onboarded on the digital path. And my thinking is that truly at scale, given that even now we don't have enough qualified teachers in maths and science, and we don't have a plan to significantly alter that in the short term and medium term, we really need to perhaps look at a different construct where we're looking more for facilitators, and we're more providing sort of the learning experiences online or any other digital medium, including virtual reality, to actually support the learning and provide the actual learning experiences and content, because that's, for me, is the big worry. Yes, we know how to get it right with a great teacher in a good school. The question is, how do we get it right beyond that? And this is where we've got to think differently. And I don't know that the concept of a teacher can prevail as at scale at that point, given the situation we're in now, even in South Africa, and it's much worse in many other countries on the continent.
So you're saying the actual role of the teacher is going to look different maybe not in St. Cyprian's, maybe not in all places, but if we want to really shift the needle on education in the country, we have to revisit the role of the educator. I think that's really a really interesting space to explore a little bit more. Mariam, do you want to, Shelley, go for it?
I think what is exciting about what has happened in the last 2 months is that the critical qualified teacher shortage in South Africa no longer seems to be is possibly not such a challenge, because now schools such as mine can hopefully change their whole outlook on what community engagement means and share qualified teachers over the digital platform. And I think with facilitators, because I think relationships are critical in learning, but facilitators in other classrooms and perhaps twice a week visit of that school, we can start sharing good teachers and making use of these valuable resources.
Yeah, which would be amazing. I think there's something really special in how we capture and share those learning experiences more broadly. And again, it can be real time and it can be on demand. So I think that's exciting. I'm mindful that I'm not maybe following your questions enough. I picked up Claire asked a really great question about how inclusive is this blended mode of delivery. So can we just see if there's any experience in our panel around special needs, and how have children in this period in particular, or in what we're talking about in a future sort of space of what education can look like, how do we really make sure that we accommodate for children with special needs? Any experience or comments there?
I haven't necessarily had a lot, Kirsty. Hope you can hear me. I know Maria was saying you couldn't hear me. But I think it really comes back to Miriam's point about education getting to a point where it can be personalized and customized based on where you're at now. Because that would adequately accommodate for children with special needs. I've been a juror on a platform called the World Summit Awards, and it assesses locally developed content across a number of the UN states. And we've seen an increasing number of sort of applications that are specifically designed for children with disabilities to help them communicate, to learn how to write a bit and read more. And without those interventions, they were relatively understimulated in their school environment. So I do think there's a lot of potential there to add that component of AI onto it that would make it more personalized. I'm also looking at another project at the moment where Imagine Worldwide is a San Francisco-based organization where they are providing specially designed child-directed learning applications on tablets for 4 to 6 year olds to really help them improve their literacy and numeracy. And there's quite a range of children in these poorer schools, urban and rural, and that's personalized sort of learning opportunity to go through it at your own pace and get additional support, and for people to see the data on where you're actually struggling is a key part in being able to provide that specialized support. So I do see a key role for technology in that, because it's going to be near impossible to provide human one-to-one support the whole day, but you are able to have an experience on your own on a digital platform, and for then the facilitator or the teacher to use the outputs of the data of what's happened to further guide your learning.
Thank you. And Mariam, I want to ask this question about the assessments, assignments, what would work best? And we've touched a little bit on this in the conversation so far, and saying, there's the, children learning from a textbook and memorizing that, and then, passing a test and then forgetting it the next day and carrying on and not realizing how to apply it. What's your view on a future way of which to consider assessments, assignments, examinations? What could we think about with that, and what role could technology potentially play? And again, back to the role of the teacher or the lecturer in that space as well.
I heard this thing once, I really liked it, that, right now the rich kids have iPads and tablets and the poor kids have teachers. But in the future, the poor kids will have tablets and the rich kids will have teachers. You cannot do away with a good teacher and an in-person touch of someone who knows how to impart good education and good pedagogy. I think what technology is going to do, it's going to replace bad instruction, bad teaching. It's going to replace much like in our lives, we have delegated a lot of the stuff that we used to remember just, 1 or 2 decades ago. We've just delegated it to technology to free up that mental space. So anything that is going to be repetitive will get delegated to technology. I want to caution against this mindset of technology being the panacea to every problem. All the evidence that has come out so far on technology in education has at best given mixed results in terms of whether technology is good for learning or not. I think that we will be forced to think of a hybrid model in which the teacher does the things that a computer or a robot or artificial intelligence cannot do. And in fact, the teacher does things that they can only do with the help of artificial intelligence and technology-enabled instruction. On the question of assessment, I think that we will now move away from the paper and pencil, the computer-based regurgitation of content that is just memorized. I think, as I said, that the SAT is now, at least for this coming year, is optional. It's not required for admission into Ivy League schools for this coming year. Assessment is in itself, I think, going to adapt, because assessment as a marker of, getting people to get a check mark on their resume, and then to move on to the next level, I think that those days are going to be behind us. Because as you can already see, all these large MOOCs, and now there are nano degrees, which are like micro masters that places like MIT and other top universities are offering. They are not really interested, people taking those are not really interested in the signaling to the world that, I passed an exam, or I passed the 2-year master's program or 4-year college degree. They are driven by that I am able to do these, I understand programming or coding, or I can do that. I think assessments will adapt similarly. Even right now, when you get a resume of somebody, I think you give them 3 months, because frequently what the resume says and what the person is capable of are 2 very different things. So in fact, your test scores sometimes only predict as good as your horoscope predicts whether what's going to happen. At least that's been our experience with some of the hirings in Pakistan. So I think that this whole assessment model, which was all about testing rote memorization, which was about, forcing some kind of artificial, passing a rite of passage to some people and not to others, which particularly disadvantaged people with special abilities, differently abled people, which disadvantaged people who were not native speakers of the language of the test. So all of these barriers, I think, are going to be lesser barriers going forward.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm keen to hear your view on that, and I think it's awesome that the results that you're reflecting through this time are so positive. I mean, it's actually really encouraging to hear that, because there's been a lot of anxiety and other pressures that everybody has had to cope with during this time. So to keep an academic record going in that period is fantastic. What's your view on the assessment exam formal kind of way of assessing learning?
So I have two confessions to make, and those are the two major failings, I think, in the schooling system. And the one is the way we assess in the modern day time, because every time digital technology creates another threat, we've got to find another way around. So at first it was a check coming into the room for matric exams, hand your phones in. Then the phones were on the watch, and so it was show your wrists, hand your watches in. Now we're talking about girls or students able to have glasses that are also going to be technologically accessing the web. Are we going to make them write without glasses, or are we going to finally realize that we've got to change with the times, you know? And I think that the teachers became really creative about the assignments and the methods of assessing the girls. And so the results are probably a better reflection of knowledge and skills than that raw testing that teachers would resort to because it was easy. And so there were a whole myriad of different ways, orals, group presentations on Teams, and various kinds of essays and projects that were used that were so much more valuable to the girls. What they also found was in this whole process, when the matrics started coming back to school, and then the sevens, and we've had others back, that, wow, it's much slower to teach in class than online. Because those that are battling, you just access them separately for the last 15, 20 minutes, and the others go ahead. So I think differentiated learning became easier for them. But my other big confession is that mainstream schooling has failed dismally in differentiated learning and assisting children with learning barriers. And I think that, I don't know the answers to this, but I know that already the technology is assisting in that regard, just in terms of the ability for children with dyslexia to listen to the answers, the questions, and to record lessons and type and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that there are going to be some real answers for a more inclusive education environment in the future.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I think, you know, I want to come to a question, might be a little bit of a controversial one, but I guess the question's who is actually responsible to educate a nation? I want to get your views on what government's role is in this. There many people have got roles to play. It's not just about the teacher in the school or the college or the university. Who do you think is ultimately responsible? And if we sit here today and we're saying, in the large majority of cases, education is failing in so many different ways. It's fundamentally broken in so many different ways. Who's responsible, and what are some things that we can do? What are some messages we could put forward to government or to whoever you think is responsible, and say, this is a proactive suggestion we can do, or something we can take forward as a result of this conversation, using our networks and try to get the dialogue going in a direction where we feel it should go. Let me, Ripalang, ask you start. I can see you're all still thinking, sorry.
Yes. That is an incredibly hard challenge. And I think sort of my starting point in my thinking is which parts of education is perhaps the focus here. Is it sort of basic education or further education or higher education and the like? And I think there could be different roles to be played at each of those levels. In general, as an entrepreneur, I think that governments should really play a facilitative role and be able to create the environment where institutions can invest the resources, the time, and ultimately thrive. And the biggest thing that I think we're missing in the government role at this point is a clear indication or better indication of demand based on our country strategy, based on our economic strategy, and what is actually going to be required in the future. And without those demand signals, I think we've left the rest of the market that is producing the skills relatively ill-advised and unaware of sort of where the opportunities for young people are really going to be. So when I say facilitative role, it's really that coordinating role. Have we really spoken with the Department of Education, the sector in sort of investments and business, in science and technology? What have we coordinated what the country will sort of need? And I think that's a key role that government could play. That is not happening currently. So I guess that's where I'll start the conversation, but that would primarily affect further and higher education more than basic education.
Thank you. Miriam, what are your thoughts?
I think that if we look at the apps and the websites like Khan Academy that have been huge successes, they have put the ultimate responsibility of learning on the learner. And these apps and these websites, these massive online courses, they really sort of make age just a number. And once you instill that, you decide which video you click next. You decide if you want to take that test again. And you decide if you want to take a course in a field totally unrelated to yours. I think that perhaps the role of the policymaker in this situation is to really enable the private sector that is showing good innovation, good results in enabling people of all ages to become good learners, lifelong learners, to have self-guided learning trajectories, for them to find those models that are backed by research and to scale them up. The government's job is to scale up ideas that are already good in practice, that are tried and tested. And I think the private sector has a particular advantage in experimentation, innovation, and therefore is better at in the domain.
Fantastic. Shelley, I'm going to ask you to answer on that one as well, and I'd like to get your view and then the others just around the question Rob posed about schools that are girls or boys only versus co-educational. Any particular thoughts on that in the current situation and for education going forward into the future?
So I think that boys should be forced to go to co-educational schools. I think they need it desperately, and I think girls should be in all girls' schools. And I'm not sure how to achieve that with any level of success. But seriously speaking, though, if one has to reevaluate how we're doing teaching and learning, then we could accommodate both in a co-ed environment. The world is co-ed after all, and then just be creative about times when maybe it is easier or better to learn this section alone or this topic alone. I think we can be as creative with that as we can with the linear learning of ages, with the finding ways around the bubble learning that we tend to do. So I'm not answering the question well. I run a girls' school. I'm very pro girls' schools because I think that by and large, girls do better in girls' schools. I think boys need the exposure of girls in the classroom and of female teachers. So I might have to eventually say that the co-ed environment is more healthy for society.
Okay, no pressure. You can say whatever you like. Rob will correct us all at the end anyway, I'm sure. Rapalang,
Sure.
your views on the co-ed space?
Yeah, I guess my view is only really personal. I went to a girls-only high school and a co-ed primary school, and I must say that I really love the girls-only environment. I think we need to recognize that we still live in a patriarchal society that is designed for the advancement of men and the growth and success of men. And it remains the only time in my life where it was okay for women to be unapologetically competitive. And post then, there actually isn't a similar space in adulthood, and women have to be less a bit to not make the men more sort of intimidated. So for me, I think it was an incredible time to remember And whenever I feel like I need a women's session or girls catch up with other unapologetically authentic, competitive, and ambitious women, I still find them primarily from my school.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for that. And Miriam, we have to ask you the same question on the boys or girls or co-ed. What's your view?
Well, I agree with Rapilang that I was raised in for my first 12 years kindergarten and the 10 years of schooling in an all-girls Catholic school in Pakistan. And for those 12 years, I learned to think of myself as a person and a human being first, and then a girl child. Because for the rest of my life, the world always looked at me first as a woman and then a human being. So that time, those foundational years where I could be a person, where my gender was one aspect, perhaps a tertiary aspect of my identity, was really important in me becoming the person I am. The flip side of that is in the neighboring school, the all-boys school, the culture of boys will be boys was being promoted. And they got to be boys without having to worry about what the consequences of certain kinds of behavior would be in the real world. So it's a difficult question. I do think that very strict segregation from a very young age leads to other social problems, which we are seeing now in the Me Too movement coming up. You cannot just help women to step up and raise their voice without also helping men understand that while they're being fully, unintentional in how they're damaging women, it is still happening. So I think that the importance of coexistence is currently undermined for younger kids because we are so focused on segregating them. There are real advantages, but I think that you cannot deal with problems such as when a woman comes out and says that I felt that this happened and this was wrong, and the man says I thought it was fully consensual. It's possible that both are right, that the woman felt wronged and the man felt he had not done anything wrong. And I think that is a product of us raising boys and girls in totally different parallel worlds. So I think some level of interaction is important, while it is also good to have, especially for girls, to have a space where they can be people before they can be young women.
Oh, thank you very much. There's such an interesting series that I know is going to come specifically for women. I'm sure Rob will talk a little bit to it, but I think some of these topics, outside of the space of education, are important topics for us to be able to really debate and talk about more on this. Mike wants to hear Shelley's answer about who's responsible for education. Shelley, can you answer that one for us, please?
So I don't have the exposure of my learned panelists. So I'll talk purely from the South African context. And I think that learners, I always talk to my girls in the senior school about taking responsibility for their own education. So I would agree with Miriam there that there comes a stage where the learner is responsible. But obviously, sort of prior to age 14, 15, they're not ready for that responsibility. And we cannot put that responsibility on the shoulders of parents, because we have an entire generation in the South African context that is that was denied an education, and through the struggle certainly went into the struggle and couldn't be educated in any form. And so it has to, in our context, fall on the shoulders of government. And I remember as a student in 1989 at UCT, during my HDE, learning about the education crisis then and thinking, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to solve this, because it was so massive in 1989. And so there's no real judgment from me in terms of how well or not government has done in trying to correct the wrongs of the past, because I think it was almost going to take decades and generations to solve. But I do think that the responsibility of government is more from a financial side, and then to employ educational experts to guide them, because the kind of one size fits all of you all do this lesson on this day results in rote learning and not real education. So yes, the government, but not in the instructive, authoritative way that it's being done at the moment.
Thank you very much. I don't know how we're doing for time, but the one question that I haven't yet asked, and I think it's important in the context of COVID-19, and maybe this one is sort of one that we can wrap up on for each of you to answer. Claire asked about social learning. You know, how important is it, and how much more difficult has it been over this period to have the role of peers learning from one another and that social learning component? Has it been possible to be achieved? Has it been more difficult? Shelley, you say it's been amazing to have them all coming back and having them together, and I'm sure it creates very exciting moments. But let's just talk on the topic to close us out around social learning, the benefits of it, going forward, how could we deliver on it in this whole world of experiential learning? We're all talking about that as part of this topic today. Just your thoughts on that. Anybody want to start, ladies? Shelley, go for it. Thank you.
So I often wonder how successful we would have been as a school at this online learning process had there not been relationships formed beforehand. Because we were able to tap into girls that we knew were going quiet when we needed them online, and we were able to ask the right questions. And so that's the one thing is I strongly believe that true learning occurs, and Miriam spoke about that teachers will be in the rich schools for the rich kids. Because I think true learning is relationship based, and where you as a teacher can stand in the front and you can respond to the body language. You looking perplexed? Are you with me? Or where have you gone? You're out the window, and that sort of thing. So I think that is a social part of the learning. But I've also have reports from parents of children who, and these are the younger children, grade 4s to 7s, have developed real fears, phobias about going outside. And I think in time we're going to learn the impact, the psychosocial impact on these children of this pandemic. And so coaxing them outside when they were allowed to go out for walks, when that was opened up, coaxing them back to school. We've had 1 or 2, even in matric, who have suffered from severe anxiety about being back in the classroom, and some people are just not listening to the social distancing, and a real fear that has developed. So I think all of that's going to play in time. But I think we're social beings, and that school allows for that to a great extent. Physical schooling.
Thank you. Raphaëlle, your view, sure. And I mean, even I hear you from your own experience at school, and now the peers that you created there, how big a role do you think that will play post this period?
Sure. I think I'm in the agreement that the blended sort of learning approach is going to be key. And there's no one silver bullet. It's really about finding fit for purpose for particular behaviors or skills that you want to develop. And to ultimately develop the collaboration, the leadership, the management skills that we require in leaders, there has to be that personal engagement. And we're already struggling to sort of get enough of that, I think, in the employers that I speak to. So I think that social element where you are working with your peers is crucial. And I think the big reason why it's crucial is because being with other people provides you with different references of reality. And I think when you are too much sort of by yourself or learning on your own, you lose perspective of other perspective, and you start to think more that your view is universal. And being able to be consciously aware of the different references of reality and points of view is crucial in any emotional intelligence, self-awareness, or leadership role. And I think the lack of that is a key stumbling block for many leaders.
Lovely. And Miriam, I'm going to pass to you, and I see we've got one question popped in from Esther around the bridging the gap between industries and educational sectors. So I think that's very well placed for you to respond on that one as well. But give us your view also on the social learning piece.
Well, if you look at what are some other spaces in which people are learning from one another pre-pandemic? So places like Amazon and Uber, people rely on each other's, views of complete strangers to, get a rating on a product which is better, or a product that came in broken. And even on Uber, very quick transaction, and people rate, who was a good driver and who wasn't. I think the future of peer learning may have different levels. So one level may be, like, as Shelley pointed out, the horizontal bonds of trust that existed prior to going online became very crucial in creating that holding environment for people to continue learning from each other. But I think that people will start trusting the voice of the public in certain ways that they weren't before. The other thing in that is the question about the link between practitioners and learning. How does that work? I think we may have to bring apprenticeship back. We sort of went into this one-size-fits-all model, and we sort of moved away from how Plato and Socrates, how they learned through asking questions, through spending time with experts, to small, in modern terms, small class size. So I think those might be, and technology can enable that with breakout rooms, and so not everything has to be massive online webinars. So I think we may have to reset on how learning happens, tapping into the discipline of psychology rather than, whatever we do right now in education, just digitize it.
Yes.
So it's sort of reinvention by going back to the drawing board.
Rappeling?
Sure. Just to tap on that last question, I think part of the key thing is when she mentioned apprenticeship, it sort of triggered my thoughts, is that one of the key challenges with apprenticeship was that you relied on having access to, the relationships that would get you under a good mentor or a coach so that you could become good at something. And that will always play a factor. But I think we can use new technologies like augmented and virtual reality to provide moments of experience so that people are not waiting for that rare opportunity to have that right relationship. And we started to see more of that in technical training for years already. And now that, the costs of virtual reality are dropping, we're starting to see in our research, VR being used for more softer skills training, like customer service or preparing for a job interview, and those things. And I think given that the industry's knowledge is often so far removed from the university or the education institution, and the opportunities to access are still very limited to the privileged few, we can get better at crafting experiences to give people that greater exposure that are not limited to having that relationship. So I'm quite keen to see how we can leverage experiential technologies or immersive technologies to give people, an eye into the world before they have to wait for that opportunity to come by. And it'll probably make them better able to get those opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. CCP saying brilliant idea. Let's start apprenticeships from grade 11. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of support. And Rob left us with a wonderful quote there: "If you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a nation," as an African proverb. I don't know what I'm meant to do right now, so I'm expecting Rob is going to appear at some point. Maybe I need to disappear for him to appear. I'm going to try that quickly.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that is the case. Kirsty, that was great. Everybody, thank you so much. Miriam, I know it's been a late evening for you, and I greatly appreciate it. Rappeling, Shelley, fantastic. And all I can say that, in my educational period, there were times when I really wasn't happy or enjoying it, but then all of a sudden, often on a subject that wasn't my core subject or the subject I was good at, there would be a teacher that would just break through some way to me. And I just fell in love with that course, and I loved it. And I learned and learned and learned. And when you generate a passion for learning, the world is yours. And really, Thank you for a super panel. Lovely. Look forward to meeting you all in person. And Kirsty, well done. Terrific. You were better than me by a long shot. Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.